Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good Friday evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm meteorologist Mike Ottenweller, and you've turned into your Alaska Weather, brought to you by the National Weather Service. Happy Veterans Day to all the veterans out there. Thank you very much for your service. Tonight is November 10th, 2017, Friday. You can get in touch with any of the three offices at 1-800-472-0391, and that will get you to the automated line, and you can talk to a forecaster directly with just a couple prompts. And then weather.gov/Alaska will take you to our regional perspective, and from there you can access information for the Juneau, Fairbanks, or from the Anchorage office. And if you need to get in touch with us here at the TV desk, just use that email, nws.ar.tvweather@noaa.gov. Well, let's jump in because it's a busy night. Lots of weather to talk about from southeast all the way up to the north. So for southeast, we have a few winter weather advisories remaining. All of the warnings have been dropped. Conditions have warmed up along the coast enough that most of the precipitation was a mix of rain and snow. So the winter weather warnings are along the coastline are dropped, and we just have these winter weather advisories for the Haines area until 6 p.m. Friday, and then for Juneau and Petersburg until midnight Friday night. And then as we shift gears towards the north, well, these are mostly going to be watches here in the orange and advisories along the coastline there in the yellow. This is a variety of products as we have plenty of moisture and some stronger winds starting to move up and over again another ridge of high pressure that's kind of sitting down out over Bristol Bay. And so from here we have a variety of winter weather products and high surf advisories, that's the yellow, and coastal flood watches, that's the orange, as well as combined with some winter weather watches. So mainly areas that we're concerned about for the coastal flood areas is the Kotzebue and the Deering area, possible rises of 5 to 6 feet above the high astronomical tide, and so that watch is in effect for coastal flooding until 6 p.m. until Sunday afternoon. And then for Shishmaref and Kivalina, we're looking for rises of about 3 to 5 feet, and for the Wainwright area to Cape Lisburne about 4 to 6 feet. And then winter weather advisories are also embedded in here, winter weather watches and winter weather advisories. So take a look at the Fairbanks office for the latest on these. Some of those are for as much as 6 to 12 inches of snow near the Noatak and the Upper Kobuk Valley, and those are in effect through much of the weekend. So again, tune into your Fairbanks forecast office to get the latest details on each of those products. So let's look at our satellite loop now, and here you can see that plume of moisture starting to ride up into western Alaska. It's a little jumpy here. Let's take a look at that again. Here it comes, and we have to skip a few frames, but it is starting to make its way northbound into the western part of the state. And so with that, we do expect plenty of moisture to start to ride up and over the ridge of high pressure and start to impact along the northern portion of the state. As we look towards southeast Alaska, that's where we can see that area of low pressure spinning away in those last few frames there. And as that does so, it's going to allow the moisture to finally dissipate. Those advisories will come to an end, and that moisture will move off to the south, but the winds on the backside with some cold air will pour in from the north. So you can see that spin right there, and that's what's going to help to pull those winds down through the bays and passes and the gaps of the inner channels. As we look towards the North Pacific, there's our moisture starting to move up. Not expecting a lot of this to impact southern Alaska, but we do see plenty of that starting to make its way through the Bristol Bay area and just trailing kind of right in here with this warm front. So some light snow being reported this afternoon towards the Kuskokwim Delta and a little bit more towards the Kuskokwim Valley, places like Sparivon. But along the coastline, we do see it mixing with rain just a little bit there with those warmer sea surface temperatures. Up towards the northern portion of the state, we do have snow continuing for much of the interior portion. And then along the Arctic coastline there, that's where we have some continued light snow and some blowing snow conditions with that stronger winds out of the west to the east. How about off to southeast Alaska? Well, you can see here our 1,000 millibar low pressure system is starting to pull away from the state. There's all that cold air wrapping in behind it, and more cold air still yet to come off of the interior portions of Canada. And so you see some rain showers coming across the Gulf here. Some light snow showers still lingering across portions of the higher terrain there. So those winter weather advisories remain in effect this evening, and then all rain by the time you get south near Dixon Entrance region. As we look off to the west, we see that 1,039 millibar high pressure. That's going to slide off to the east and gain some strength and start to push inward towards the central portion of the state. That's going to lead to some foggy conditions tonight around Bristol Bay, but what should happen is that precipitation that was over the Delta and the Kuskokwim Valley will dissipate through the night. However, the precipitation that was pushing up through the Bering is going to finally start to make its way into the Seward Peninsula and just to start to clip the Cape Lisburne area. So with that, that's where we have that suite of coastal flood and hot and winter weather products out for those areas. That system also continues to contribute moisture to the northern portion of the state, so we see some light snow continuing along the Arctic coastline. For southeast Alaska, well, it's not going to be a rapid change, but we will see the precipitation come to an end, but there will still be pockets of blowing snow through places like White Pass and Chilkoot, and that'll be because of that wraparound strong cold air advection. As we get into Saturday, though, that low will start to drift off to the east. Precipitation should start to diminish even more, but we do expect those blowing snow conditions to continue. Just starting to see that kind of trough of colder air as it moves out over the warmer water. You get that trough that forms there. It helps to really enhance the showers off the coast, but also is reflective of those strong winds blowing off. High pressure remains in control for much of southern Alaska, so not expecting a lot of active weather here, just those gusty offshore winds. We'll talk about those a little bit more here in the turbulence maps. As we look towards the Aleutians, the Alaska Peninsula, just expecting some fog underneath that area of high pressure. It's right up here where we have our focus for the weekend. This is where the active weather is going to move through. It's changing from a all snow as you look inland to a rain-snow mix as you get closer to the coast, and then eventually all rain. But it looks like as things try to make their way inland, not a lot of that warm air is going to punch inland, so we expect things to remain snow for much of the interior portion. And then as it comes across, it should, again, stay all snow. It's going to sweep from west to east, probably clipping the Alaska Range and maybe the Copper River Delta, certainly impacting the Fairbanks area. So possibility, again, of 6 to 9 inches, as much as 12 near Noatak. That's looking like the hot spot right now. As we look towards southeast Alaska, improving conditions with winds starting to come down for you all. That area of low pressure pulls away. Should start to even maybe see some skies clearing there by Sunday. And then again, back off to the west, another system trying to ride up and over this area of high pressure. This pattern doesn't look to be any too quick to change. So how about our temperatures? Well, Saturday morning out over southeast Alaska, you can expect things near 30 degrees, a little bit cooler to the north, a little bit warmer to the south, maybe 23 degrees there for Yakutat. As we look towards the eastern portion of the state where that high pressure is in control, temperatures hovering around 0 to anywhere as cold as -12. And then up along the north coast, temperatures generally in the teens to low 20s, starting to see a little bit closer to 30 degrees southwest Alaska, and then towards 40 degrees over the Alaska Peninsula. How about Saturday afternoon's highs? Well, for your weekend, you're looking for mid-30s in southeast Alaska. For the interior portion of the state, generally in the teens, some single digits. Along the coastlines, though, hovering right around 20 to 25 degrees, and then building even warmer, 30 to the mid-30s by the time you get to southwest Alaska, low 40s over the Alaska Peninsula. For Sunday morning, temperatures will fall into the mid to low 20s for southeast, expecting generally single digits across eastern Alaska with increasing cloud cover, and then our warmer conditions again hugging along the west coast here for Sunday morning. And by Sunday afternoon, still seeing things rebound into the mid-30s for southeast, and similar conditions expected for much of the interior with mid-40s for the Alaska Peninsula.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Off we go into flying weather now, and as you can see here out over southeast Alaska on Saturday morning, we do start out with a little bit of lingering moisture, continuing to keep MVFR conditions throughout much of the area, and then those IFR conditions confined to the higher terrain. As we get up towards the central portion of the state, IFR conditions hugging the north side of the Alaska Range with MVFR conditions around that area with continued light snowfall. And then our widest area of concern is here along the west coast, and we'll continue to see this spread north and to the east as we go through the next couple days with that moisture coming up and into the western half of the state, and that slides all the way off into the Brooks Range as a pocket of IFR conditions along the northeast Brooks surrounded by MVFR. Off into Saturday afternoon, you can see for Southeast Alaska that you all have improved to visual flight rules. Still a little bit of MVFR pockets along the eastern portion of the state, but again, our area of concern remains along this boundary here as it moves that moisture up and into the western portion of the state, and you'll notice the trend off to the east with that moisture. So IFR conditions really all the way from the North Slope down through Seward Peninsula, through Kuskokwim Delta, and down into the Bristol Bay area. MVFR conditions becoming IFR once again out over the Bering Sea. Sunday morning, continuing to see VFR and pleasant conditions for southeast Alaska. Strong offshore flow around that high pressure will keep things gusty, but should stay VFR. IFR conditions, though, will spread in through the central portion of the state, and MVFR conditions pushing out just in front of those, affecting the eastern half of Alaska. And then off towards Bristol Bay, continue to see IFR conditions there with lower ceilings and visibility, and then continuing those MVFR trends for the Bering Sea as well. Some improvement there on Sunday afternoon as things start to lift just a little bit in the ceiling and the visibility department. This system starts to fall apart, but still fairly widespread IFR along and north of the Brooks Range, and then along the Alaska Range and spreading off towards the eastern portion of the interior, another swath of IFR, and then MVFR across much of the southern portion and the central portion of the state, continuing off into the Bering Sea. So how about for our passes? Well, you're going to expect AKwx to be MVFR becoming instrument flight rules. Same story for Adigan up there, MVFR for Lake Clark and Merrill. And for Rainy Pass, MVFR becoming VFR. This is going to be a hit or miss MVFR, and the VFR should develop by later in the afternoon. Windy Pass, same conditions as Rainy, MVFR becoming VFR. Isabel, however, not enough time to improve, so IFR becoming MVFR, or to improve to visual flight rules, I should say. Mentasta, IFR becoming MVFR. And Tenita Pass will be visual flight rules. Portage, also visual flight rules, stronger high pressure there, allowing those folks to clear out. And Chilkoot and White starting off as IFR, but quickly improving with that offshore flow to visual flight rules. Our freezing levels, well, you can see again with that surge of moisture and warm air, surface line hugging right along the coast, but that warm air starting to override that surface area, so pushing the freezing levels all the way up to 6,000 feet here towards Savunga and 8,000 feet down by Dutch Harbor. Off towards southeast Alaska, you folks have generally seen that surface line hugging up towards the higher terrain, but that will slowly push its way towards the coastline here as we see that cold air work its way back in. How about for our icing? Well, it's going to keep the icing confined mainly along the Alcan border, slightly lower above 2,000 feet here, some isolated moderate, and then just above 3,000 feet, and this should be waning through the day, that isolated moderate for southeast. And then our new area will be this area coming in, starting out above 8,000, but working to 6,000, and then eventually 3,000 as it gets towards the Seward Peninsula, and that is going to be some isolated moderate associated with our new system. Jet stream looks like this, coming in kind of a couple different phases here, about 100 knots coming off of Siberia and 75 knots coming in through the Bering, riding up and over our ridge of high pressure, 80 knots, and then this is the area we want to focus on, diving down at about 110 knots, really helping to accelerate things through the upper levels, mixing it down to the lower levels, and that's where we expect that strong offshore flow all the way up to 130 knots as it comes under this area of low pressure. So how does that look at 9,000 feet? Well, you can see generally clockwise flow around the high at about 20 to 30 knots, but here's where we want to focus. Strong offshore flow from much of southern Alaska all the way up to 55 knots for southeast Alaska for near the Yakutat area. Generally westerly, becoming southerly flow for the northern portion of the state at 9,000 feet. And then as we get towards 3,000 feet, seeing a little bit more of a southwest at about 45 knots across the northern portion of the state, and generally offshore flow between 40 and 25 knots for the southern portion. As we look towards the Bering Sea, generally a southerly flow becoming a northwesterly flow around that high pressure. So turbulence, well, you can expect it there through the bays and passes below 6,000 feet, considerable moderate, and then with our next system moving in below 4,000 feet, considerable moderate, so quite a bit of chop.
Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider. As you well know, you can get forecast information for any day of the week. Today, tonight, tomorrow, out to 6 or 7 days. It includes the high and low temperature, the wind direction, the chance of rain or snow in your part of Alaska. But did you know that there is information available to forecast out to 2 weeks? So the question is, how would you use that information? And here to answer that question today and tell us a lot more about climate services from the U.S. National Weather Service Alaska region is Rick Toman. He's the program manager for the Climate Science and Services. And Rick, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Dave.
How would we use information that is out to 2 weeks instead of just the high and low and the chance of rain?
Well, Dave, as we move out in time, of course, forecasts become more uncertain. So as we move into that second week from now, we're not looking at specific highs or lows or precipitation amounts at any given place. What we can do with the state of the science at this point is get a handle on patterns. So we can say things like increased chances for stormy weather in the Bering Sea in 2 weeks, or we've been in a cold weather pattern, looks like 8 to 10 days from now, that pattern's going to change. Those are the kind of forecasts that we can currently make in that second week.
So you're increasing lead time for perhaps big or small weather events and telling us the likelihood of maybe more coastal storms or wind events in some areas?
Those are the kinds of things that that we hope to be able to let Alaskans know in the second week forecast. And if you have an activity or an event that you would find that kind of advance notice useful, whether it's moving stuff off of the beach, whether to go out hunting or to come back from camp, those kind of decisions, the week 2 provides the opportunity for you to get a handle on that kind of information.
Okay. What other type of weather impacts that we're familiar with might Alaskans use climate services for?
Well, in the forecast realm, we can go provide some information from this week 2, say the 8 to 14 day period, on out to the monthly and even seasonal time scale. Now, those monthly seasonal forecasts are still kind of just really very much pattern dependent, and the amount of detail that we can provide at this point is still pretty limited. Generally, indications of how temperature and precipitation will fall in maybe above normal, below normal kind of range. But in the week 2 period, we can be considerably more specific than that as far as the general patterns and really the impacts on Alaskans.
Okay, so we would be talking about generalizations there that would tell us that the period might be more stormy, might be more hot, more dry, more cold, and situations like that. That's
correct. So we're not going to be able to say in which community, for instance, there's the threat of coastal flooding, but we can often be able to tell we're moving into a pattern that would be conducive to big Bering Sea storms. So if you're in an area that could potentially impact you, you'll want to pay attention to the weather forecast.
Okay. Now, every day and every hour of the day, the National Weather Service is working on a forecast for the next day. But how do you start your forecast process for that extended period that goes out beyond 7 days?
Well, the way things work right now, we start off with the expected general flow pattern for Alaska and the whole world, really, and then we narrow that down to Alaska. So we start off with the basic computer model forecast. There's quite a few different computer models that we look at, bring those together. And then another important part of that is we attempt to assess the confidence. The reality is often 2 weeks away, the computer models are very divergent. They have lots of different solutions, and that's an indication that we don't have much confidence. But when we see more agreement in that time frame, and when that agreement is a pattern that will be potentially very impactful for Alaska or is a big change from what we've been in, that's when we can then take that expected pattern. We have computer models forecasting it. We've assessed the confidence. Now we can move that forward. How, using our experience as Alaskan weather forecasters, how does that typically play out for Alaska? So is this a stormy pattern for the Bering Sea? Is this an extra rainy period for Southeast? Is this the kind of pattern that generates strong winds potentially in the Anchorage Bowl? Is this a deep cold pattern for the interior? All of those are the kind of things that we're looking at in these large-scale patterns. That's very different than telling you that the winds on 10 days from now are going to be gusting to 120 on the hillside. We're looking for patterns, not the very specific information that the Weather Service will then hone in on as the event gets closer. So the idea is to keep the 5, 6, 7 day forecast the same, where you are getting the standard high and low temperature and the chance of wind or rain,
but further out you get a broad general forecast, but as the time gets closer to that event, we'll get a lot more specific.
That's correct.
Okay, very good. So how can people use this information if I am out in the bush and I want to see, is a coastal storm expected in my region, or is a chance for that improving over the next 2 to 3 weeks? Where could I go to get information like that?
When we see that potentially impactful or a big change in the weather is coming 8 to 14 days out, typically we will start to highlight that on the Weather Service Facebook site. We might produce a YouTube video highlighting that, linking that on our Facebook site. So often we don't, at this point, we don't have much to say in that because we're really looking for those forecasts of opportunities. But one thing we can say very likely as we go through the next 2 or 3 years, there'll be more and more of this kind of forecast information available in that week 2 time frame.
Okay, and something that emergency managers and city planners and folks in villages might be interested in keeping an eye out for, looking for that information to be headlined, whether that's on social media or perhaps through the National Weather Service channels there to get information from you to make better plans a little bit longer term and make better preparations in the event that things become a little bit more unsettled.
Absolutely. Climate Services with the National Weather Service Alaska region is talking to the state of Alaska every week, apprising them of that 2-week outlook, and on the social media side, we are working to keep Alaskans informed so that when we think we have some confidence in a high impact or a big change, that's the best way right now for folks to find out about that. Twitter, Facebook, so stay tuned to your National Weather Service.
Very good, a developing program. Rick Tolman with the National Weather Service Alaska region. He's a Climate Science and Services Program Manager. Thanks so much for joining us again, Rick, and I hope to have you back again soon.
Great, thanks Dave.
For another edition of Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider. We'll see you next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Here's a look at the latest sea surface temperatures and sea ice analysis. You can see warm water continues out over the eastern portion of the Gulf, helping to increase those showers with that cold air pouring offshore. And then still some warm water along the west coast here, stretching up towards the Seward Peninsula. And it's not until you get up towards the Chukchi Sea that you see those colder temperatures starting to sink south. So how does that look in the reflection on the sea ice? Well, you can see starting to increase the concentration of the pack ice and the shore fast ice here east of Barrow. However, it's west of Barrow where we haven't seen a whole lot of growth just yet there out over the Chukchi Sea. So once these winds die off and the colder temperatures start to settle in, we should see ice continue to grow across the region up there through the northwestern portion of the state. So for Southeast Alaska, how's your weekend marine forecast? Well, it's going to be gusty out of Lynn Canal, 45 knots out of the north with possibility for some higher gusts. Seas all the way up to 9 feet. 30 knots out of the north towards Stevens Passage, 30 knots, seas 6 feet, and southeast winds 15 knots, seas 3 feet towards Dixon Entrance. Low pressure out over the Gulf will allow the winds becoming east to northeast around that low, and anywhere between 25 and 35 knots, and seas between about 9 and 10 feet. Some gusts there off of Sitka out of the east up to 45 knots on Saturday. Those gusts and those stronger sustained winds start to come down by Sunday. North winds at 35 knots for Lynn Canal, seas 7 feet. 25 knots out of the north towards Stevens Passage and seas about 5 feet. And then becoming southeast, 3-foot seas and 15 knots for the inner portion on the southern side of the inner portion. As you look out towards the open waters, northeast winds 25 to 30 knots and seas about 7 to 8 feet. For South Central, you can expect that offshore northerly wind throughout the entire area, anywhere between 25 and 35 knots. Do want to make mention of some stronger gusts coming through the Copper River Delta all the way up to 50 knots on Saturday. So be advised if you're transiting across this area, you could see some stronger gusts through the bays and passes, and this includes Prince William Sound. The wind becomes a little bit more west-northwest on Sunday, so expect the strongest winds through the Barren Islands, about 40 knots. Seas generally are going to be the highest there, between 11 and 12 feet. Otherwise, a north and west wind, 10 to 25 knots, and seas between about 3 and 7 feet for the rest of the area. For the Alaska Peninsula, expect generally a northerly and northwesterly wind across this area, 20 to 35 knots, and seas about 6 to 11 feet. Do want to make mention that there is a special weather statement in effect for some resuspended ash from the Nova up to Katmai area, and that's going to bring that ash across Shelikof and into Kodiak. So keep a lookout for that special weather statement. And then on Sunday, west and northwest winds 20 to 35 knots, seas between about 6 and 9 feet. For the Aleutians, a little bit of a reversal of flow. Northwest here, 10 to 15 knots near Dutch Harbor, seas about 4 feet. Becoming southeast, 20 to 25 knots, seas climbing up out over the western Aleutians, 11 to 13 feet. A little bit calmer here towards the central Aleutians, 5 to 12 feet. And then on into Sunday, expect a southwest wind for the eastern Aleutians, southerly for the central, and then southeasterly out towards the west. Winds are going to be between 15 and 30 knots, and seas anywhere between 4 and 16 feet across that fairly expansive area. On to the west coast now, we look at southwest to westerly winds anywhere between 20 to 35 knots, and seas generally between 6 and 7 feet, all the way up to 13 feet here south of St. Lawrence Island. And then on into Sunday, expect more of a northwest and northeasterly direction, except down by the Pribilofs, a southerly direction, anywhere to 15 to 25 knots, and seas 6 to 10 feet. And then up towards the Arctic coastline, west winds towards Prudhoe Bay and Kaktovik, 25 knots, and seas 7 feet, except where there's ice. And then more of a southwest to southerly flow, 25 to 35 knots, seas on the order of about 11 feet on the west coast. And then those strong winds wrap around that area of low pressure out of the west, 40 knots, seas climbing all the way up towards 18 feet. And you can expect that westerly flow to continue along the Arctic coastline there, 20 to 30 knots, and seas between 5 and 10 feet up there. A little bit more southeasterly direction north of Kaktovik, and then westerly off the coast of the Seward Peninsula, 25 to 30 knots, and seas between 10 and 14 feet. So recapping our weather now, you can see that area of high pressure keeps things pretty quiet across southern Alaska, but that's really the only area where things are quiet. Moisture will continue to stream in from the west over the ridge of high pressure into the Seward Peninsula and on into the northern portion of the state. So there is a host of winter weather advisories and winter weather watches, as well as some coastal surf advisories and coastal flood watches for those areas up in the Fairbanks region. Low pressure starts to pull away from the southeast area portion of the state tonight, and that will just leave some stronger, colder north winds on its backside, and you can see the blowing snow conditions are possible. Meanwhile, this moisture continues to stream over the state into Sunday and will really bring a good swath of snow to much of the interior portions. Thanks for joining us. Have a great night.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.